Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome back to part 4 of our podcast. Enjoy. In fact, the really intricate illustrations can be an integral part of their experience with the book.
Exactly. And it's books like this that will be read and reread because there is so much to read in those books. Because it's not just the words only, it is, yes, the words are so cleverly constructed, so few words, and readers, so I've seen year 6 struggling readers engage with texts like this, and say this one in particular, who go, oh my goodness, do you know, Chris Van Allsburg, you know, you want to think, is he using alliteration here? You know, A was in an avalanche. You know, the B was badly bitten. Oh, so is there alliteration? And then we find it's not. It doesn't follow that pattern. Then they're looking at other literary devices that this author is using. So it takes children to a very different level of reading, and I think an important level of reading.
Even though they're a struggling reader, it's taking them to these levels.
Yeah, because what is it that they struggle with? For some children, we said they struggle with motivation.
Yep.
So that's what we have to sort out and help them with the selection of books. For the child who has difficulty with decoding, let's not kid ourselves that means they are not good at comprehending. You know, let's not limit a child to what they are struggling with. All readers are not struggling with the same thing.
Yeah.
They are struggling with different elements of, and sometimes we think, right, they are not a good comprehender because they are a poor decoder, or they are not this because of that. You know, we want to build a fullness for children about what is reading, what is a motivated, engaged reader doing. They are reading with accuracy, they are reading with comprehension, they are reading to make full meaning.
So I'm seeing this struggling reader as a child who, through the higher literary devices in this text, they are seeing themselves successful in this aspect of reading. And because they are successful in that aspect of reading, that gives them the prop up to say, okay, now I can start to deal with this decoding.
Yeah.
You know, it's not one at a time. It's that I've got one aspect holding me up and supporting me, and that helps me to then address this other aspect that I'm not as strong at.
Yeah, and I'm not diminishing in any way the importance of decoding.
No.
Not diminishing it in any way
at
all.
You're giving them a tool, a way of getting into that decoding, because you've got that other successful aspect happening in them as a reader. Because reading is not just one of those things.
Correct.
We don't separate it, because if you separate it, they're losing that prop up, that scaffold that's going to hold them up.
Well, actually, they're losing the whole fullness of what reading is.
Yeah.
Like we can't get full meaning from text without we can be a good decoder but not read fluently.
Yeah.
We can be a good this without that.
Yeah.
But what we want, what our readers need to know is that if they are struggling in one part, that doesn't mean they're struggling in everything. And how can we let them see through good text selection that what they have got to bring, what they've already got to bring, that they can get better at. I think that's the thing that, I really learnt from one child in particular. I really learnt as a teacher, because I think we learn far more from our struggling students.
I agree.
Than we do from any other children, because we so want to find out from those strugglers, what are they good at? What can they do? They need to know that they've got enough of some things here to move them forward, and that it isn't all just, I think the hardest thing is when children think, I'm no good at reading because I can't do blah.
Yes, and yet there's all these other aspects that they are good at.
Yes. So, when I ask a child, what is it that's making this difficult for you? They know. They invariably know what it is. So it might be a child saying, do you know what makes reading difficult for me? Is when I can't, like sometimes it's a visual thing, like it's something about their vision. They'll go, because it looks blurry on the page, you go, well, for goodness sake, I've jumped to a conclusion about. Or they might say, and these are questions that are on the survey, what makes reading difficult for you?
Okay.
Like it might be that when I come to a word and I sound it out, it still doesn't work. Oh, right. So you just need more strategies for decoding.
Yeah.
Not just need, but isn't that a big window then?
Yeah.
All right, so I know how to decode using this strategy, but when that doesn't work, I don't know what to do. Or it might be, it could be that I'm an English language learner, so I don't know what these phrases mean. I don't know what swing a cat means. So the older our readers get, the wider, this is what I want to say, the wider the range of things we want to expose our children to as readers, not just a very narrow. We can't think for our strugglers that if we just go a very narrow path, that we're going to get them to where they need to go.
Because if they've got that wide range of aspects of reading.
Yep, and the complexity, wider.
We'll find that there's a number of those things that they are quite strong at.
Yes. Like I think we want to find out, we want children to be cognizant of what it is that's difficult for them. And for us not to always jump in and label that. Yep. To say, oh, this child's not good at. No, because this child that I'm sitting with and I'm going, I think they're not good at this. And I say, just tell me what's difficult for you. And when they tell me that, I go, oh, my goodness, right, now I know how to help them.
Yeah.
Because we can't jump to the conclusion that all children who are struggling as readers are struggling with the same thing.
So it's having this wide range of aspects of reading that you're exposing them to. They've got all these strengths, and some of those strengths are not as strong as they want them to be, but they're identifying what those are, and you're helping them.
Yes.
Okay, we looked at that Chris Van Allsburg book. Did I say it correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
You did.
Any other devices that have helped these really struggling ones?
Okay. So in choosing books, because this podcast, there are some more to come. But this idea of, all right, what other books or what other texts actually, let me just go back one step. In our minds all of the time is we want to keep thinking, how am I getting my students into more and more complex text? So that's why using that Chris Van Allsburg text as an example is like there's complexity, some complexity around that text. And in our Australian curriculum, we are moving children through what are simple texts through to moderately complex, complex, highly complex. I think they're the categories. But that's our job as teachers, is to be moving them into more and more complex text. So that's why we don't necessarily want to just draw our children back to very simple text in the hope that that's going to get them what they need to get into more complex text.
Yep.
So that's why I'm talking about having text that is, for our readers. If it's a child for whom decoding is a big challenge, well, then let's give them something that's really worth decoding.
That's a good
and
point.
let them do the big thinking around it and be aware of literary devices that were being used, building their vocabulary in it.
So in that
through
book,
it.
In that book, the decoding aspect has been more.
No, the decoding in this book is made simpler by the fact that it's not a chapter book, and so there are only about, say, 10 words per page.
So the decoding challenge has been reduced.
Yes.
But all the other aspects of that book are very high.
Yes.
Yep.
And even in the decoding aspect, what it's allowing, so plenty of high frequency words there, as all texts, but the more complex words in this text are the kinds of complex words and vocabulary that we want older children to be having in their bank of vocabulary, in their knowledge of words.
And what's more, they want to have it.
Yes. So let's just take that word avalanche for a moment. Okay, it might not be, if we talk about the tiers of words, it might, it's not a tier 1. We probably put it into a tier 2. It's not a tier 3 word. You know about the tiers. I won't go into all of that, but it's a avalanche. It's a content-specific word, I suppose. But looking at the word avalanche, actually, I can use some decoding strategies to work out what that word might say. So it's not diminishing what strategies I apply to that, but it's just that I'm not overloading them with so many words on a page, that, oh gosh, I'll get to decode that word, but now I've forgotten what I've just read. So it's like one sentence on the page.
Yep.
And yes, I can struggle, I can strive to work out that word. And because there's heavy illustration with it, I can check in and go, avalanche, yes. Let me self-monitor that. Now, if I don't know what an avalanche is, then there's more of a question about that, whether it doesn't matter which book I'm reading then about that, but what it does is it builds my knowledge now. If I didn't know about avalanches, like, okay, all these rocks falling down. Oh, is that what an avalanche is? So let me do some wondering about that. Let me make an inference about that then. Is that what an avalanche is? Rocks falling down. So, reading is thinking. And we want our struggling readers to know what they can strive for. It comes back to our mini lessons from last week, or our learning intention of we need our children having such a repertoire of strategies for decoding words or solving words, for inferencing, for connecting, summarising, analysing, being fluent, reading with accuracy, monitoring ourselves. We need such a range of all of that when we're teaching those things and a child has got, let's say I'm year 6 and I've got the Z was zapped and that's what I'm reading independently, whatever strategy I'm being taught in the mini lesson, I can apply it to my book and get even deeper as a reader.
Even though I'm a struggling reader at an older year level.
Yes, yes. So the texts I work with...
So the texts you work with are really important.
Yes.
Do you want to talk any more about the texts?
Linda Gambrell uses this wonderful phrase, the blessing of the book. As a teacher, I really want to expose my children to many books, and this whole book selection strategy and children knowing about books, it can't be said any other way than they need teachers who know a lot about books. Now, in my 3rd year of teaching, when I was doing, some postgraduate study, one of our assignments was to read 100 children's books.
For that year?
For that semester.
Half a year?
Yes. And we were looking at readers in the year 5 to year 10 range. Not 5-year-olds to year 10, but years 5
to year 10.
To year 10. We were to read 100 books and to give a synopsis of those 100 books. I'd already been, really switched on, loved reading children's books and, buying them. But my goodness, that changed everything. Now, I'm not saying everyone's got to go out and read 100 books, but the more we read, or the more we can say to our students, do you know what? I think you'd enjoy this. Or I think this, and I'd go to bookshops, in fact, thinking about who's in my class, what is it that might work for them. I'd ask other people, it's this finding out about what's there for children. And if you're in a school that's got a librarian, oh, joy and bliss, because they've got such powerful knowledge. And I'm thinking of a college in Toowoomba who, wonderful, colleague and friend of mine is the librarian in that school. They are so blessed to have somebody with knowledge like that. So if you're in a school with a library, your librarian knows so much and can be a great support to you too.
And I think you can strike gold in a public library as well. You'll find,
of course,
a person in there that will just be so knowledgeable about children's books.
Yes,
yep.
Bookshops. As a listener, if you're ever, wanting good books, we've had Rebecca Bird give some suggestions.
Yes.
From Peggy Williams' bookshop, Genevieve from Where the Wild Things Are, Children's Book Council. So the Children's Book Council Awards, every year 100 notable books are listed.
Yep.
They are great books. Like, just read the synopsis of those books. Sure as eggs, you're going to find something that goes, wow, do you know I've got a child that would just so suit?
And if you've got a series of books, you really probably only have to read one of those books in the series to get an idea of it.
Yes.
And then you could recommend that whole series to that child.
Yes. So this idea of, and do you know what? Even if you don't read a whole book, there is, for yourselves, to do this book blessing with children. Sometimes it can also be book tasting, where I used to make it a bit of a habit. Once a week, I'd have 5 books. I'd just read the first paragraph.
Yep.
especially of chapter books, because my main mission, of course, is to get all of my children into chapter books in that year 3 to 6.
Yep. And I think you're also looking for strong literary language. Misty talks about the children getting a really deep reservoir of grammar, of language, of vocabulary.
Yeah.
And some of the series books, they'll be great to get them onto reading.
Yes.
But we need to get those children onto. And
great foray. You're already leading into that. But the next thing that we will talk about, which I'm guessing will be in the next podcast now, now that we look at our time, is the critical importance of reading aloud.
Hi everyone, just a little Teachific promotion here. We've kept our Teachific individual membership price at the same level for quite some time now, but we're announcing an increase in fees on June the 1st this year. However, if you join now, you are future-proofing your membership to stay at $12 a month forever. So become a member now to access all our resources and courses at this amazing locked-in price. Looking forward to you joining. Bye now. And that's where you can get them to those deeper language. Yep.
Yes, and that is a strategy that really elevates life for our struggling readers.
Okay.
So we'll talk a lot more about that, but at this point, let me just, other book selection strategies, definitely so I'm thinking about some quick things to be doing. Pick 5 books off a shelf, chapter books, read the first, that would be suitable at the year level that you're teaching. Read the first paragraph of that. I guarantee you will not walk, back to your space or wherever without 5 children saying, that sounds so good. Can I borrow that? Can I?
So you're sitting in the library, for instance, and you've got your whole class in front of you. You've got a stack of books and you're just reading the first paragraph of each book.
Yeah.
And that's going to switch some of those children on.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I do also recommend that children have a reading journal.
Yes. Yep.
Where they are tracking 2 things. One, in that instance, I've read the beginning of, these 5 books and someone's missed out on having that book, or they're going, okay, I can see it's going to be a bit hard for me. And we just need to talk about, 5 and 3 finger tests as well. But if I've got my reading journal with me, let me put the title and the author of that book on my wish list. I think it's so good for every child to have in their reading journal a page that lets them list books that they're hearing about, that interest them, that might not be their one to try just yet, but, I'd love to get to that sometime, or it's not available at this moment, or I read about it somewhere and could we get it in our school library or, in our class library. Taking this interest in books and having this page, this way of constructing ourselves as readers. Now, every child, whether I'm a struggler or a high flyer, a thriving reader, this expands our world as readers. That reading survey we talked about, that should go in a reading journal.
Reading journal.
What else should go in a reading journal? I think a record of what I've been reading.
A reading calendar.
So on Teachific, we've got reading calendars, which is a day by day. What have I read today? What's important about that? Over a month, a child sees exactly how much they've been reading. It lets the teacher really easily know, are students progressing with a book, or is it so laboured that they're only getting 2 pages read in a day or, in the reading time? Let me just check in, is that book right for you, or is it a bit too challenging? Or just to ask the question, 2 pages in a day, how's this book feeling for you? We don't want to make too many assumptions about, oh, that doesn't look right. They might go, well, actually, there's a lot for me to think about as I'm reading. Let's give it back to the child. Let them have the voice about this. But having a record of their reading. On our reading calendar, we've also got, what are the reading goals for this month? How did I go with those goals? And there's some handy notes, about how we might set up those calendars. But in some way, it's really useful for children to be able, it's not just useful, it's powerful for children to be able to have a record of what they have achieved in terms of books read in a year. This isn't about racing through them. This isn't about, tick it off and so now I get my, medal or my this or my that. It's not about reward. The reward is
the experience.
How the motivation and the joy that I have and the confidence that I have in the reading that I'm doing. And it's a visible representation of, wow, this is my reading story. This is me as a reader. And I think sometimes we as teachers feel like, we've really got no record of what our children have achieved as readers, apart from maybe a standardised assessment. These are really important records that our children can be keeping. It's their story, but it lets us be able to look in on that and be the guide for them to go, oh, so you've just finished that book. Right. Do you know what next?
So it allows us to work as a team together on helping them with their reading rather than it just being all their problem or all our problem. It's shared together.
Yeah.
We're working on this together.
Yeah. And bringing that reading journal, so if you're borrowing from the library, bring your reading journal to the library. Anybody can help you with the, you're selecting books. Oh, so this is what you have been reading. Oh, you don't need a new book. You're still going with this one. Fantastic. You've brought it with you. You're sitting in the library. You're reading some more of the book that you're on.
So the recording is really important.
Yes. Now, in the library, we're back to the library. My gosh, we've gone all over the place. We're back to the library. There was another part of the process that we did in the library. But if I've got a classroom library, I'll talk through how the process would be just a little bit different. But in the library, so as children were then choosing books, and, 3 of us have gone around with a couple of children each to find their books. Before children borrow and commit to any book, they need to just check in with the teacher and just do a little read to the teacher and a little talk about, why have I chosen this book? Here I'm reading a little bit of the book. Is this right for me? Yes. And I'm not borrowing a book that isn't right for me.
Okay.
Because if it's not right for me, it's not going to help me as a reader.
Yep.
Now, we would have also heard of like the 3-finger test and the 5-finger test. 3-finger test really being, reading a paragraph of a book, putting a finger down for each word that I don't know in that book. I've really got to work hard at decoding that word or solving that word, or I just have no idea what that means. If I've got 3 fingers down in a paragraph, that's telling me, if it's any more than that, it's too hard.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But there is also another 5-finger test that I quite love, which means that I'm just with an open hand putting my 5 fingers on a page in the book, and where each finger is pointing, I read that word.
Okay, so it's like a random selection of 5 words anywhere on that page because you've got your whole hand spread out.
Yes.
And your fingers on the page. Yep.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I do that on 5 different pages of the book.
Yep.
If I have in total 5 words that I couldn't read
Out of those,
25 words, well, if there's more than 5 words, it's hard.
yep.
If there's less than 5 words, great, go for it. But what I love about that is that it's absolutely letting us know too about how automatically children are reading those high frequency words, because mostly our fingers should be on words that, won't be difficult words. So it's kind of also a really great way for children to say, wow, there's a lot of words on this page I can read.
Yeah.
So we don't always want children thinking, oh, yeah, for everything, oh, yeah, now there's all those words I can't read. This kind of lets us know, wow, there's a lot you can read.
In most cases, half the words on that page will be high-frequency words.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So just back to, that book tasting or book blessing. Oh, let me just go back to that 5-finger test. I can do that in the library, and teachers just checking in before borrowing that the books that are being borrowed are just right. What we also did as part of the process was got children to write that book on their reading calendar, because now in the library they've got a chance to do a little bit of reading, and they're getting that straight onto their calendar and committing to it. If in their little space of reading time that they've had, if they go, actually, now I'm not sure that this is as right for me, just right as I thought I was, there's time to go and get the next book.
Right.
But we do something about it then, not in a week's time when we've had 20 independent reading sessions in class, so 100 minutes of reading, and we've not grown any bit as a reader.
So this library time is a really good book selection strategy time where the teacher and the students work as a team to really find the just right books.
And for the struggling readers, when we go to library, we might come with their tub of books that we've already, remember how I said, I made a pile for every child. What I often do is put, that big collection of things in one tub of books, and then children can look through that rather than, always having to go back to the shelf again.
It's more supportive of them.
Yeah. Or some librarians will have children with cards where they put the card on the library shelf where they've found the book that they've really enjoyed, and then that means that they can go back there to find the kinds of things that they're interested in. So that's another. Sometimes libraries will, bundle books into collections. Maybe by the author, or maybe by the series, or maybe by, there are some texts, like the Holmes series or the Sherlock series or whatever it is. And sometimes we do bulk borrows of those so that they are there and always available for the students who are needing those. But they're in the decision making of that, of let's take back a few of those books as a bulk borrow for the next 10 weeks or however many weeks. If I was in the classroom and got a big classroom library, I'm really doing that book selection and getting my next book. I'm doing that in a conference with a child, because that going to the library and changing over my book that day is really suggesting that everybody is finishing their book at the same time and returning it at the same time.
So that conference can be done during independent reading in your reading workshop lesson.
Yes.
And that's where you can confer with children or just casually meeting with them. And
look at their reading journal, look at interests, look at their calendar, look at what they've been reading, where to next, and in our reading workshop, once a week, I'm really getting children to have some kind of written response about what they're reading.
Yeah, very important.
Because there is the value being placed on the very reading that they're doing. So it might be a little summary of what they've read. It might be, there's a whole lot of ways we can get them thinking about and responding, reflecting on what they've been reading and reflecting on themselves as a reader. Setting goals. I think we've talked about that. We've put that on reading calendar, setting the goals.
And that can be about, changing genres of what you're reading.
Yes, the breadth of what you're reading. So I've only ever read, example from a year 6 class where, a child in the class said, I just don't read fantasy. And they said, well, what about trying it? Try one.
And that's where Read Aloud can then expand them as well.
I think a lot of things now, a lot of the further things are going to come into the next podcast when we talk about how we can use Read Aloud to actually help build part of these book selection strategies as well.
All right.
But not just book selection strategies, about how to support struggling readers further. Oh, do you know what? There is one more thing I need to say about the choosing of just right books and children having collections of books that they can read. For year 3 to 6, this works so well. And that is, so for the child to tell a story to an adult and to have that adult handwriting, word for word, that story as it is being told. And we would write that over the pages of a book, of a blank book. But on the page, it would be maybe half the page would be text and half of it would be space, maybe a box for that page to be illustrated.
By the child.
And so we're not doing the whole story on one day. We are doing a little bit of the story on that first day. The child illustrates, but they also reread what you have now written because you've written it in their words. They reread that to then illustrate. They need to reread that again the next day or whenever it is that you do the next lot of scribing for them. So that story continues over a number of days, and that works for, if that's an illustrated text and if that's looking like a book format, that should be part of their independent reading, and they will happily read and reread that book to be able to get it to a full and complete story. And in the meantime, they are reading something that is just right for them.
Yep.
So that adds to their collection of readable material
and that
high motivation.
And that technique is called a language experience approach.
Yes.
Yep.
For older, we often talk about it for younger.
But it can be used for older readers. Yep.
Yes. So we are writing it as they speak it. So it's in there, works wonderfully for second language learners to have this. And that gives, as Allington tells us, struggling readers need to read and reread.
Yep.
And that builds in rereading with high motivation.
Yep.
As does, and we briefly mentioned it before, but poetry is actually a key piece in, if we're bringing poetry to children, let your children have copies of that. Let them have that to not only have a copy of it, but put it into, a lot of teachers I work with, children put them into their reading journals, and as a powerful element of comprehension, an illustration on the page next to that poem accompanies it.
Yep.
So there we have not only a rich piece of text that is familiar to them and into which they have an entry point, but there is that opportunity to represent understanding of that in an illustration, so in a visual representation.
Yep. But poetry has those wonderful structures, often like the rhyme and the repetition and the rhythm, that provide a structural basis for them to have success.
Yes. Yep. And so because they are generally shorter pieces, but they are complex and rich.
Yeah, they've got the language structures, the vocabulary.
And full of growing complexity.
Because in that language experience, it's just, not just, but it's their spoken language that's being written down. Yeah. Poetry will take it to another level with their vocabulary, their language.
But it's the complexity that when we're trying to move our children into year level complexity of text, poetry, and the rereading of that is really going to get us there.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's a wrap. But do you know what? It's the thing that is, it's hard. It isn't a one lesson thing. It is an ongoing. It takes ongoing, and I'm not going to say work. I'm going to say ongoing intention.
And joy.
And absolute joy for teacher and reader of finding the path, this rich path for
every reader in your
every
class.
Reader.
But we are particularly talking about the struggling readers. Sharon, that's been a wonderful couple of sessions on choosing just right books. Thank you very much for all your insights. Oh. And thank you, listeners, for being with us today.
Yes, and I'm really hopeful that there's, some stepping stones there for people to find some little pieces. Oh my gosh, I just have to share one more thing.
Okay.
That it is such a powerful thing before children are going back to the library to just share out what it is they're returning. Just hold it up. Say, I'm returning this today. Every child just doing a little, what are you returning? Before you even get to the library, there's often been, right, Kate, can I borrow that from you? Jonathan, pass that on to so-and-so because they're looking for that. So it can be done in the classroom before you go. It can be done in the library before things get to the return box, or put back in. This whole idea of, between us sharing, what are we reading? What have we found that's interesting? Honouring everybody and the things they've found and explored.
Yeah, it's that social aspect of learning. It's it's Vygotsky, it's Bruner.
Yes, So hopefully plenty of strategies there for little snippets of things that build into bigger habits and routines and ways to grow for not just our struggling readers, but for all of us to grow in exploring and finding and selecting really tremendous books.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to our listeners, and bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. Happy reading. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.